the perfect stitch. The tape measure whispered linen against the polished floorboards of Silas's stitchery as it slipped from Silas Blackwood's grasp. He stepped back from the three-way mirror, his gaze, as ever, dissecting the fabric's drape, the meticulous line of a seam, the subtle play of light on delicate embroidery. A man of precise angles and perfect arcs, he judged Sarah Jenkins' dress to be almost flawless. Almost. "It feels a little snug," Sarah murmured, her voice a soft counterpoint to the ancient sewing machine's distant hum. She gently tugged the bodice, a faint crease marring the smooth indigo silk. Their eyes met in the reflection, hers bright and curious, his more reserved, a lifetime of tailoring etched around them. "I just turned 18, could we perhaps adjust it?" Silas cleared his throat, a small, involuntary sound. 18. A milestone. He'd measured her for her christening gown, her first school uniform, her confirmation dress, each passage marked by his careful stitches. An uncharacteristic flush warmed his cheeks. There was a lightness in her tone, a hint of something beyond mere fit, that he couldn't quite decipher. The small fitting room, usually a haven of muted light and hushed fabrics, suddenly pulsed with a quiet, almost playful, tension. He reached for the tape measure again, his movements deliberate, a professional barrier re-established. "Just a minor adjustment, then, Miss Jenkins," he rumbled. "We aim for comfort as well as elegance." He meticulously remeasured her bust, then her waist, his fingers briefly brushing the warm skin of her arm. He could feel her youthful energy radiating, a vibrant contrast to the measured stillness he cultivated. The shop, a legacy from his grandfather, then his father, had been his for 35 years. Each thread, needle, and thimble held a whispered history. He recalled his grandmother's crisp, starched collars, the pervasive scent of beeswax and raw wool. This wasn't merely a business, it was a lineage, a testament to a craft increasingly rare in a world obsessed with mass production. He believed in the integrity of a perfectly executed seam, the quiet strength of a reinforced buttonhole. He believed in Silas's stitchery. Sarah, a frequent visitor since childhood, leaned lightly against the mirror, observing him with an easy, open curiosity. "You always get it just right, Mr. Silas," she said, her smile genuine, full of an unburdened optimism that often startled him. "It's like magic, how you know exactly what someone needs, even before they do." He grunted, a sound that could have been agreement or simply the effort of concentration. Magic. He called it experience. Years of observing human forms, understanding subtle shifts in posture, the way a person carried themselves. He'd seen bodies transform through joy and sorrow, through seasons and years, always finding the perfect stitch to accommodate. He marked the fabric with a sliver of Tailor's chalk, a ghost white line against the dark silk. "The shoulders need to sit just so," he explained, more to himself than to her, his brow furrowed in concentration. "And a little more give here, perhaps." He indicated a spot below the armpit. "We want you to breathe freely, Miss Jenkins, to move with ease." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "To dance, you mean," she teased, her eyes twinkling. "This dress is for dancing, after all." The image of Sarah, radiant and uninhibited, spinning across a dance floor, momentarily fractured his carefully constructed focus. He pictured the dress flowing around her, a vivid swirl of indigo. It was a pleasant image, a departure from the usual serious measurements and quiet adjustments. He cleared his throat again, a little more emphatically this time. "Indeed, Miss Jenkins. For dancing. And for whatever else life might bring your way." He straightened, a faint smile playing on his lips, a rare, almost imperceptible softening of his usual professional demeanor. "We will make sure it is perfect. A snug fit." The heavy velvet curtains parted with a soft swish, revealing Sarah in the amber glow of the fitting room. She turned slowly, the emerald green silk rustling around her. Silas, poised with his tape measure, watched her reflection in the full-length mirror. He had envisioned this dress for weeks, each stitch a testament to his meticulous craft. Yet, as Sarah moved, a faint creasing appeared across the bodice, a subtle ripple in the otherwise smooth expanse of fabric. Sarah's smile, usually so radiant, was tempered by a faint uncertainty. She met Silas's gaze in the mirror, her eyes a shade less bright than usual. "It's beautiful, Mr. Silas," she began, her voice a little softer than her usual cheerful lilt. She smoothed a hand over her midsection, then gave a gentle tug at the side seam. "It feels a little snug, actually." Silas's brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. Snug? He had taken her measurements just weeks ago. His tape measure, a familiar extension of his hand, slid from his fingers, landing with a muted thud on the plush carpet. He stepped back a pace, his gaze fixed on the reflection, trying to reconcile her words with the impeccable lines he believed he had created. The dress, a rich jewel tone that complemented her dark hair and fair skin, should have draped perfectly. Sarah turned fully, giving him a clearer view. She wasn't pulling at the fabric out of discomfort, but rather an exploratory gesture, as if testing the garment's limits. "I just turned 18, she offered, a touch of mischievousness returning to her eyes, though still edged with a hint of awkwardness. "Perhaps I've grown an inch or two since the last fitting?" She gave another gentle tug, this time at the waistline, her fingers flexing against the silk. The air in the small fitting room seemed to thicken, subtly charged with an unspoken dynamic. Silas, usually so composed, felt a flush creep up his neck. He cleared his throat, the sound unusually loud in the sudden quiet. He was accustomed to the precise language of measurements and fabric, not the shifting landscape of youthful growth or the delicate nuances of a young woman's body. Sarah's comment about turning 18, coupled with the soft, almost intimate gesture of her hands on the dress, had introduced an unexpected element. The room, which moments ago had been a sanctuary of threads and patterns, now felt oddly intimate, infused with a quiet, almost flirty tension. He found himself momentarily at a loss for his usual precise response, his carefully constructed routine disrupted by the unexpected. He merely nodded, his gaze still fixed on the subtle tightness around her ribs, a new problem to solve, one that felt more personal than any he had encountered before. A spark in the mirror. The tape measure, a worn canvas band imprinted with faded numerals, slipped from Silas's fingers, coiling silently onto the plush carpet. He took an involuntary step back, his gaze fixed on Sarah's reflection in the ornate, gilded mirror that dominated the fitting room. He'd been so engrossed in the line of the sleeve, the precise fall of the skirt, that her words, soft as they were, struck him with the unexpected force of a gong. "It feels a little tight," she murmured, her fingers lightly brushing the bodice of the gown. "I just turned 18, maybe you could make another adjustment." Silas cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet of the room. The air, usually thick with the scent of fine wool and beeswax, now seemed charged, humming with an unfamiliar energy. He felt a peculiar flush creep up his neck, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades, certainly not in the quiet sanctity of his workshop. He was a tailor, a craftsman, his world defined by measurements and meticulous stitches, not by whatever this was. His eyes, accustomed to discerning the subtle interplay of fabric and form, found hers in the mirror. And there, amidst the soft hazel of her irises, he saw it, a tiny, almost imperceptible sparkle, like sunlight catching on dew. A small, knowing smile played on her lips, a curve that hinted at amusement and something else he couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't the innocent joy of a young woman anticipating a new dress, it was something sharper, more aware, a glint of genuine mischief. The sight flustered him, a warmth spreading through his chest, unsettling his usual methodical calm. He felt the sudden urge to adjust his spectacles, though they sat perfectly on his nose. His hands, usually so steady and precise, twitched slightly. This was uncharted territory, a deviation from the well-worn path of client interactions. He prided himself on his professionalism, his ability to remain detached, to focus solely on the garment. But Sarah's presence, her unexpected candor, had momentarily unstitched his composure. He shifted his weight, trying to recenter himself, to anchor his thoughts back to the task at hand. "Perhaps," he managed, his voice a little rougher than intended, "we could try a different pose. Turn slightly to the left, if you would, Miss Jenkins. Let's see how the drape responds." He watched her in the mirror as she complied, the gown rustling softly around her. The sparkle in her eyes remained, a persistent light that refused to be dimmed, even as she adopted a more formal stance. He focused on the fabric, on the way the silk caught the light, on anything but the lingering impression of that knowing smile. He needed to re-establish the professional boundary, to bring the fitting back to the realm of seams and hems. But even as he tried to intellectualize it, a part of him acknowledged the subtle shift, the unexpected spark that had just been ignited in the quiet reflection. The bell-like laughter. The tape measure slid from Silas's fingers, clattering softly against the polished wooden floorboards as he stepped back. His gaze, usually so precise, felt momentarily unfocused as Sarah turned slowly before the cheval mirror. A soft laugh, light and clear like the chime of distant bells, escaped her lips, and she met his eyes in the reflection. "It feels a little snug," she murmured, a faint blush rising on her cheeks as she tugged gently at the bodice. "I just turned 18, after all. Perhaps another adjustment?" Silas cleared his throat, the sound a dry rasp in the sudden quiet of the fitting room. He'd meticulously measured her just 6 months prior. His instruments, his calculations, they were always infallible. He prided himself on that. Yet, as Sarah shifted, a playful glint in her eyes, the delicate silk stretched taut across her chest, pulling at the seams. It wasn't merely snug, it was decidedly too snug. The fabric, a rich emerald green he'd chosen to complement her fair skin, strained with her smallest movement, betraying the very notion of a perfect fit. He watched her lift an arm, then let it fall, her movements fluid and uninhibited, yet each gesture made the silk ripple with protest. The fine stitching along the bodice, usually so discreet, became a visible line of tension. He took a hesitant step closer, his eyes narrowing, not in disapproval, but in a slow, dawning comprehension. It wasn't the cut of the dress, the pattern was perfect. It wasn't the fabric, the silk had no give beyond its natural drape. It was her. Sarah, sensing his intense scrutiny, laughed again, a fuller, more resonant sound this time, and spun a slow circle, her hands floating away from the fabric as if to emphasize its resistance. The dress clung to her, molding itself to the new curves of her blossoming figure. The emerald silk, instead of flowing gracefully, pulled and tightened, revealing every subtle contour of her back and shoulders. A quiet flush crept up Silas's neck. He saw it now, clear as day. The dress wasn't just snug because she was moving, it was snug because she had grown. Not just in height, but in the subtle, profound ways a young woman matures into herself. The slender girl he had measured half a year ago had filled out, her youthful frame softening, blossoming. It was a change he hadn't accounted for, a natural evolution that his precise measurements, focused solely on static numbers, had utterly missed. He felt a curious shift within him, a subtle tremor that went beyond the usual annoyance of an ill-fitting garment. It was a realization that extended beyond fabric and thread. Sarah wasn't merely a client, she was a vibrant, evolving person, and his rigid adherence to the past had blinded him to her present. He picked up the tape measure, its familiar weight suddenly feeling foreign in his hand. "You've grown," he stated, the words feeling inadequate, yet profound. "We'll need to make more than an adjustment. We'll need to start again. New measurements, new feelings." The tape measure, a familiar extension of Silas's hand, lay momentarily forgotten on the pristine white counter. Sarah's soft declaration, her 18th birthday, had subtly altered the atmospheric pressure in the already confined fitting room. He'd cleared his throat, a reflex, but the lingering warmth in the air wasn't dissipating. He glanced at her reflection again, then at the bespoke jacket draped over her shoulders. "A little tight, you say?" he repeated, the words feeling rather inadequate. He picked up the tape, its smooth, yellow surface cool beneath his thumb. "Perhaps a fresh set of measurements would be prudent," he announced, more to himself than to her, trying to re-establish the usual professional rhythm. It was a good, sensible decision, he reasoned, the kind of meticulous adjustment his craft demanded. He approached her, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. His hands, calloused from years of needlework, moved with a practiced gentleness. He began with her shoulders, the fabric of the jacket a thin barrier. He could feel the delicate curve beneath, the warmth radiating from her skin. The subtle scent of something fresh, like spring rain and wildflowers, reached him. It wasn't perfume, he realized, but simply, her. He marked the spot on the tape, his gaze fixed on the numbers, avoiding her eyes in the mirror this time. "Arms up, please," he murmured, his voice a little gruffer than intended. Sarah complied, her movements fluid. As he measured the sleeve length, his fingers brushed her forearm. A fleeting jolt, like static electricity, passed between them. He pulled his hand back quickly, blaming the slight tremor on an unexpected draft. But there was no draft. The room, in fact, was growing distinctly warmer. He moved to her chest, the most delicate of all measurements. His knuckles lightly grazed the side of her ribcage as he brought the tape around. Her breathing hitched, almost imperceptibly, and a faint blush bloomed on her cheeks. Silas found himself holding his own breath, acutely aware of the space between them shrinking, of the subtle expansion and contraction of her chest. This wasn't simply about fabric and fit anymore. This was different. Unexpected. "About a quarter inch," he mumbled, scribbling a note on his pad, his hand surprisingly unsteady. He was usually so composed, so impervious to the vagaries of emotion. But the proximity, the undeniable energy humming between them, was unsettling his carefully constructed composure. He could feel his own cheeks growing warm. He blamed it on the close quarters, the heavy wool of the jacket, anything but the truth that was beginning to blossom, unbidden, in his chest. He stepped back, creating a much-needed distance. "Yes," he announced, clearing his throat again, "a quarter inch, perhaps a touch more, for the bodice. And the sleeves will need to be let out." He spoke quickly, filling the silence with technical details, trying to reassert the familiar structure of tailor and client. But the air still thrummed, and the feeling, that strange, new feeling, lingered, refusing to be measured or cut away. Dreams of tomorrow. Silas retrieved the tape measure, the metallic click of its retraction a sharp counterpoint to the sudden warmth in the air. He cleared his throat again, a nervous habit he hadn't indulged in years, and focused on the task. "Right. Let's get these new measurements then, shall we?" His voice was a little rougher than usual. He repositioned himself, careful to maintain a professional distance, and began to remeasure her waist. The fabric of the partially fitted dress, a soft wool, whispered as he worked. "You know," Sarah began, her voice a bright, unexpected melody, "I've been thinking a lot about the future lately." She turned slightly, her gaze catching his in the mirror again, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Now that I'm officially an adult, it feels like everything's just waiting to happen." Silas grunted, a noncommittal sound, his eyes fixed on the numbers on the tape. He moved to her bust, his fingers brushing lightly against the fabric, his movements precise and practiced. "Indeed," he murmured, trying to keep his attention solely on the task. "I mean, I want to travel, of course," she continued, undeterred by his lack of enthusiasm. "See the world. Maybe start in Paris, you know, for the fashion. Imagine, Mr. Blackwood, all the fabrics, the designs, the way light catches the Seine at dusk." Her voice painted vivid pictures, each word a brushstroke. "Then perhaps Italy, for the history and the food." "Oh, the food. I hear the pasta is simply divine." He paused, the tape measure still taut around her, his hand hovering. He found himself not just hearing her words, but seeing the scenes she described, the Parisian twilight, the bustling Italian markets. The numbers on the tape blurred. He was supposed to be marking the new fit, not embarking on a fantastical journey. And then, she pressed on, leaning forward slightly, her excitement infectious, "I want to open my own little shop. Not a grand, stuffy place, but something charming. Full of curiosities, beautiful things I've collected from my travels. Perhaps some of my own designs too. Nothing too serious, just joyful." A small laugh escaped her, light and free. "Wouldn't that be wonderful? To wake up every day and be surrounded by things that make you smile?" Silas found himself nodding, a slow, unconscious movement. The tape measure had gone slack in his grip, forgotten. He was no longer a tailor taking measurements, he was an audience of one, captivated by the vibrant tapestry of her dreams. Her optimism was a potent elixir, chasing away the familiar dust of his own routines. He had spent his life meticulously crafting the present, but she, with her boundless energy, was already building tomorrow. A faint smile touched his lips, a rare, unbidden expression. He realized, with a quiet jolt, that he genuinely wanted to hear more. He wanted to know what other wonders she envisioned. A promise and a smile. The tape measure, a worn canvas ribbon, finally coiled itself back into its brass casing. Silas, his brow furrowed in concentration, meticulously noted the final figures in his small leather-bound ledger. He'd taken the measurements for the new alterations twice, then a third time for good measure, his usual caution amplified by the unexpected nature of the request. Sarah, standing patiently on the small circular rug, watched him with an unreadable expression. The air in the fitting room, usually smelling faintly of wool and old paper, now held a different, almost lively scent, perhaps from the faint trace of lavender clinging to Sarah's sweater. "There," Silas announced, his voice a little gruffer than intended. He snapped the ledger shut with a definitive thud. "That should be all. I'll make the adjustments quickly. You'll have it back before you know it." He didn't elaborate on what quickly meant for him, but a strange eagerness, unfamiliar and a little unsettling, was stirring within him. Usually, a new alteration was just another task in the long, predictable rhythm of his days. But this felt different. As Sarah stepped off the rug, the silence in the small shop seemed to hum with an unfamiliar energy. The afternoon sun, usually casting long, sleepy shadows through the front window, now seemed to illuminate the dust motes dancing in the air with a newfound brilliance. The old wooden shelves, laden with bolts of fabric, somehow appeared less drab, the muted colors catching the light in unexpected ways. Silas found himself looking around, really looking, at the shop he'd inhabited for decades, and seeing it with a fresh pair of eyes. It wasn't just a place of work, it felt, for the first time in a very long time, like a place of potential. A slight tremor, like the whisper of a breeze through an open window, passed through him. Sarah turned, her bright eyes meeting his. A genuine smile, wide and unburdened, blossomed on her face. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice warm and clear. "Really, thank you. I appreciate you doing this." The simple words, coupled with the open sincerity of her expression, struck a chord deep within Silas. It wasn't the usual perfunctory politeness he received from customers. Her gratitude felt substantial. It was as if a small, forgotten corner of his being had been gently nudged, stirring something dormant. The tension that had been subtly present since her initial request, a strange mix of fluster and intrigue, eased into a feeling of profound, yet unfamiliar, upliftment. He found himself almost smiling back, a rare occurrence. The corners of his mouth twitched, a silent testament to the unexpected warmth that had suddenly taken root in his quiet, methodical world. Beyond the fabric. The door clicked shut, leaving Silas alone in the quiet fitting room. The scent of lavender and a faint, youthful sweetness still lingered, almost palpable in the air. He stood for a moment, his gaze fixed on the spot where Sarah had been, a ghost of her presence still occupying the space. Then, with a practiced slowness, he reached for the sheet of parchment tacked to his cutting table. His calloused thumb brushed over the elegant script of her name at the top, a silent acknowledgement of her departure. His eyes fell to the columns of numbers, the meticulously recorded measurements from moments ago. Bust, 34 inches. Waist, 26 inches. Hips, 36 inches. He frowned, a tiny crease forming between his brows as he compared them to the previous set, taken just a year prior. The differences were subtle, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but to Silas, they sang a clear, undeniable song of change. He ran a finger along the new waist measurement, tracing the curve of the number. It wasn't just the inches, it was the way she'd stood, the subtle shift in her posture, the confident tilt of her chin when she'd met his gaze in the mirror. He cleared his throat, a low rumble in the quiet room. He'd been so focused on the technicalities, on the precise fall of the fabric and the perfect line of the hem. He'd seen a young woman needing a gown, nothing more. But the memory of her slight tug at the fabric, the almost defiant whisper of her age, resonated now with a different kind of meaning. This wasn't just about a dress anymore. It hadn't been about the material or the stitches for her. It had been about something far deeper, something he, in his methodical world of thread and thimble, had almost entirely missed. It was about a threshold crossed, a boundary stepped over with the grace and quiet determination of burgeoning womanhood. Sarah wasn't a girl needing a dress for a dance, she was a young woman acknowledging her own growth, seeking recognition for a transformation that went far beyond the measuring tape. He picked up a charcoal pencil, its tip sharpened to a fine point. He unrolled the half-finished pattern, the pale linen a blank canvas awaiting its final form. With a deliberation born of years of experience, he began to make adjustments. He didn't just transfer the new numbers, he added a fraction here, a whisper of a margin there. A subtle expansion at the bust, a gentle widening around the hips, not just for the current measurements, but for the promise of what was still to come. He wasn't just cutting fabric, he was shaping space, making room not just for her body, but for her future, for the woman she was becoming. Each stroke of the pencil was a quiet acknowledgement, a silent blessing for her journey beyond the familiar confines of childhood, into the vast, uncharted territory of adulthood. The linen lay before him, no longer just a blueprint for a garment, but a subtle testament to a moment of profound, unspoken understanding. A perfect fit, a new friendship. The bell above the door chimed, a lighter, more confident sound than the last time Sarah had entered. Silas, hunched over a length of deep emerald silk, didn't startle, but his fingers paused their delicate work. He watched her approach, a flash of red from her scarf a welcome splash against the muted tones of his shop. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," Sarah chirped, her voice brimming with an easy cheerfulness. "Ready for round two?" Silas offered a small nod, a gesture that was, for him, a near-exuberant greeting. He gestured towards the fitting room. "It awaits your judgment, Miss Jenkins." Inside, the dress hung on the hook, a whisper of cream lace and taffeta. Sarah slipped into it with an almost reverent air, the fabric rustling softly. She turned to the mirror, and Silas, ever the professional, watched her reflection intently. His eyes traced the lines, searching for any telltale puckers or strained seams. But there were none. The bodice lay smooth against her, the waist nipped in perfectly, and the skirt flowed with an effortless grace. Sarah's hands went to her hips, then she lifted them slightly, a tentative little bounce. A slow smile spread across her face, mirroring the subtle softening of Silas's own stern expression. Sarah began, her voice a low murmur of surprise and delight. She spun, a single, fluid motion that sent the skirt swirling around her. The lace caught the light, a gossamer cloud. She laughed then, a bright, uninhibited sound that echoed through the quiet shop. "It's absolutely perfect." She twirled again, a joyful pirouette, her arms flung wide. The dress moved with her, a second skin, responding to every nuanced shift of her body. Silas found himself watching not just the dress, but Sarah herself, her radiant smile, the sparkle in her eyes, the sheer, unadulterated happiness that radiated from her. It was a sight he hadn't witnessed often within these four walls, and a surprisingly potent antidote to the quiet solitude he usually embraced. "The sleeves," she exclaimed, examining them closely in the mirror, "they're just right. And the length, oh, Mr. Blackwood, it's everything I imagined and more." She turned to face him fully, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "You truly are a magician." Silas felt a peculiar warmth bloom in his chest, a sensation akin to the first sip of hot tea on a cold morning. It wasn't merely the satisfaction of a job well done, it was something deeper, a connection forged in fabric and thread, yes, but also in shared moments of vulnerability and unexpected joy. He cleared his throat, a familiar habit when confronted with genuine emotion. "Just a tailor, Miss Jenkins," he mumbled, though the corners of his lips twitched upwards almost imperceptibly. Sarah, however, wasn't about to let him retreat into his usual reserved shell. She took a step closer, her gaze direct and genuine. More than that, I think. You listened. You understood. And you made me feel special. She paused, a thoughtful glint in her eyes. I think we might be friends, Mr. Blackwood. The word hung in the air, unexpected and utterly sincere. Silas felt a strange lightness, a lifting of the usual gravity that settled around him. Friendship. It wasn't a term he often applied to his customer interactions, or indeed, to many interactions at all. But looking at Sarah, at her open, beaming face, he found he didn't object. In fact, a quiet contentment settled over him. He met her gaze, a rare and direct exchange. Silas, he corrected, his voice a touch softer than usual. And I believe you might be right, Sarah. Her smile widened, a truly dazzling display. She spent another moment admiring the dress, then reluctantly began to unbutton it. As she changed back into her own clothes, Silas found himself straightening his workspace with a renewed vigor. The encounter had left him with a feeling of purpose, not just in the meticulous creation of garments, but in the small, human connections they fostered. He realized, with a faint surprise, that he was looking forward to her next visit. The shop, and perhaps his own life, felt a little brighter.